Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Sunday, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Paladin, a pro bono engagement platform. I'm also a member of LSC's Leader Council and a former chair of its Emerging Leaders Council. I want to once again thank Representative Emmer for taking the time to record and share those remarks with us. Please, another round of applause for the representative. Next, we'll be turning our focus to LSC's future and the future of access to justice. It is my pleasure to introduce our next panel, which will consider the promise and potential pitfalls of deploying AI to help bridge access to justice. LSC President Emeritus Jim Sandman is back with us to moderate this exciting discussion with three leaders in the legal tech and innovation community. Margaret Hagan is the Executive Director of the Legal Design Lab at Stanford University. She was previously a fellow at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design, where she launched the program for legal tech and design, experimenting with how design can make legal services more useful, intuitive, and engaging. Satish Nori is the Executive Director of JustFix, a housing justice and technology nonprofit. For 20 years, he represented tenants across New York City at various legal services organizations. He is also a clinical professor of law at New York University School of Law. Andy Perlman is Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University. He's a nationally recognized voice on the future of legal education and law practice. He has served as an advisory council member of the ABA Task Force on the Law on Artificial Intelligence and as the inaugural chair of the Governing Council of the ABA Center for Innovation. With that, I will pass the mic to the man who needs no introduction, Jim Sandman.
Our topic is artificial intelligence and access to justice. The problem of access to justice is a problem of scale. It's huge. And solutions to it also have to be at scale, huge. Artificial intelligence offers the potential to democratize justice and bridge the justice gap in ways that other interventions have not. And that's what we'd like to talk about this afternoon. We're going to start with Andy Perlman, and I'm going to ask Andy to give us a rapid-fire course in what generative artificial intelligence is and how it works, and to give a couple of examples of how it might be used to improve access to justice in two ways. One way is to improve the efficiency of legal aid lawyers and legal aid staff in a way that will allow them to serve more clients with a higher level of service. The other potential use is a direct-to-consumer use, providing legal information and advice directly to people in terms that are understandable, relevant, usable, and accurate. I'll then ask Andy to give us some thoughts on how we might realize the potential of artificial intelligence and minimize its obvious risks, and also to say something about the cost issue. This sounds like a great tool, but legal aid organizations are not famous for having a lot of money. How do you deal with that problem?
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to do all of that in 8 minutes. So let's start with what generative AI is and what it's not. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. The reality is that generative AI is a subset of the larger category of artificial intelligence. And lawyers have been using AI for quite some time. If you've used Westlaw or Lexis or a variety of other legal search engines, you have used AI. Generative AI, however, is a lot newer. And what it involves is enormous volumes of information are absorbed, and we can generate new forms of writing and music and images, and now even video, through a variety of prompts. And in terms of text, generative AI can produce professional caliber writing. Now, what's notable is that people describe this as a technical matter, and I'm really happy Brad Smith isn't here anymore because I would mess this up. That as a technical matter, we describe it as generating and predicting the next word in a sequence. But at some point, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between predicting the next word in a sequence and what we might think of as an analysis. Let me take you completely outside of the legal context and show you a picture that I took of my daughter, who's in college. She's on the right. She was in a play from the 1940s called Arsenic and Old Lace. And like any nerdy father would do, I uploaded the photo to ChatGPT. And I asked ChatGPT, I said, well, what do you think is going on in this picture? And remarkably, it was able to discern that this was, in fact, a play, and the two people in the image were likely wearing a wig. But that's not what blew my mind. What blew my mind was the answer to the next question, which is I asked, what play do you think it is? And from this very little information that you see in the image, it suggested Arsenic and Old Lace. So I present this example to you to show you what are the possibilities of these tools in terms of inference, making sense of data. And now let's talk about generative AI's implications for legal services. Now, Jim mentioned two, and I'll give you very brief examples of them. But before I do, let me make one additional point. Here is what it is already doing in terms of law. Somebody had the brilliant idea of asking generative AI to take both the LSAT and the bar exam. It didn't do particularly well in November of 2022, failing the bar exam and getting an LSAT score of 149, which is in the bottom 40th percentile. But you fast forward just a few months, and what's remarkable is that it now achieved a score that would have been sufficient to pass in every U.S. jurisdiction and received an LSAT score of 163, which is in the 88th percentile, just in a matter of months. Keep in mind, GPT-5 is likely to come out later this year. So now let me turn to the points that Jim raised. There are opportunities here, both to scale existing legal services, but also to make more legal information and services readily available and more readily available to the public we are all trying to serve. An example of scaling existing services. Imagine putting these tools in the hands of lawyers who are trying to serve as many clients as possible. Brad Smith alluded to this idea of scaling. This example I created when I was making a presentation to Jim's class last year. I asked ChatGPT to draft a complaint in a slip and fall case as a result of somebody falling on the sidewalk outside someone's home after a snowfall. And here ChatGPT goes to work, creates a caption, the allegations of the complaint. Check out paragraph number 6. It inserts a Philadelphia Code provision. I looked it up. It's not a hallucination. It imposes a duty on homeowners in Philadelphia to keep their sidewalks clear after a snowstorm. It was right on point. It inserts an allegation or account for negligence, and even at the end demanded a jury trial. I next asked it to generate interrogatories from the defendant to the plaintiff in the case. And it goes to work and identifies what we all might consider boilerplate interrogatories, nothing terribly surprising, the kind of interrogatories that you might actually find online. Until you get to interrogatory number 4, where it knows the context for the slip and fall case and asks the question, please describe the footwear you were wearing at the time of the incident. It knew enough to ask that kind of question. And then finally, what I asked it to do is attack its own work. I asked ChatGPT to draft a brief in support of a motion to dismiss the very complaint that it originally drafted. And it gave me 3 coherent arguments in support of that motion to dismiss. Now, would I file this brief in court without looking at it first? Not if I want to keep my law license, I would not. But can you imagine these tools serving as a first draft for lawyers, very busy lawyers who are trying to serve as many clients as possible and give them the attention that they need? I think the answer is most certainly yes. So that's an example of how I think we can scale our existing services, but I think there are ways in which we can empower people to help themselves. I created this tool myself using ChatGPT. It's called a Legal Aid Navigator. And it uses GPT's information, its large language model, and I trained it to be able to guide people to appropriate resources in their jurisdiction. You can see here I said, I'm facing foreclosure. What should I do? The very first question that I forced the tool to ask in every case is, what jurisdiction are you in? And then ask, what language are you using? You heard Brad Smith mention before the capabilities of these tools to be able to translate into other languages. And after a couple of pieces of information, it directs me to resources in my jurisdiction including websites and phone numbers. At my law school, at Suffolk Law School, we have a legal innovation and technology lab where we are working with courts around the country to help to automate legal documents and make them more accessible to the public so that they can complete these forms on their own and file them directly in court. You might think of it as essentially the turbo-taxing of legal documents. And we've put this all together using AI in a simple search box where somebody can say what kind of problem they are facing. And we can interpret what is there and then guide them to automated forms where they can complete it themselves and, as I mentioned before, file it directly in court. Now, is this a good substitute for a lawyer? Not necessarily. But can it help when people don't otherwise have access to legal services? I think it is, and it's better than what many people currently receive. So I'll close with some cautionary notes. Jim asked me to highlight them, and I will. Absolutely, these tools make stuff up. They hallucinate. There is no question about it, but I can tell you they are getting better. I've already seen remarkable improvements over time in terms of their hallucination. They can also make you believe something is true when it is absolutely not. If anyone wants to hear a few stories, I can tell you some. We need regulation. Everyone acknowledges that we need regulation, including we need to think through the legal ethics implications, but I think they are surmountable. And we also need to consider that these tools absorb the biases that we all have and that there is algorithmic bias from their use. And then finally, Jim alluded to the cost of these services. There is an equity from these tools. The more money you have, the better tools you will have access to. And if you don't have money, you will get access to less sophisticated tools. This is an issue as well. But I'll end with this thought. The closing thought when we imagine generative AI and the future of legal services and access to justice, we have to ask the question, relative to what? Relative to the current state of affairs? I won't repeat the 92% statistic. You know it all very well. When we think about bias, we have to ask the question, relative to what? Relative to the current system, which has no bias in it? Or how about the inequities? What about the inequities of our current system, where more money doesn't have an effect on how much justice you receive? These are all problems right now. If generative AI can address those issues more effectively than is currently the case, we have to consider it. Thank you very much.
Andy, that was terrific. If you ever get tired of your law school gig, I think you have a second career as a Ronco salesman on late night TV. I have a couple of questions for you. What is the current state of the art for this audience of many legal aid lawyers? What is their ability right now, today, to use tools of the type that you just demonstrated? And which of them are the best? Make a recommendation and name names.
Brad Smith is gone? So the reality is it depends. Which is the law professor answer, and I also think it's true in this particular case. It really does depend on what the use case is. My experience is ChatGPT-4 is probably tied with Anthropic's Claude as the most sophisticated tool when it comes to language and generating coherent language and uploading information and making sense of the information. Those tools are accessible, and I used only those tools when creating the videos that you saw. They are $20 a month. That's how much it costs to get and if you have tried only the free version of the tools, you're really missing out on what they are capable of doing. So to the extent that, and I know even $20 a month can be a major expense for a resource-constrained legal aid organization, but it is worth trying to find one person in your organization who can try these out, learn how to use them, and eventually, hopefully, make them more readily available to the rest of the organization, because I really do think it has enormous potential for impact.
Thank you. Satish, you've been a legal aid lawyer, litigating housing cases for 20 years. You now use artificial intelligence in your work and in your clinic at NYU. Can you tell us the story of before and after, the experience that you had as a legal aid lawyer and how your use of generative AI today has affected your ability to serve clients in housing cases?
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dean, for that wonderful introduction to the issue of AI So I've been a legal services lawyer in New York City for over 20 years, and during that time, I've represented maybe 1,000 families, and I've never lost a case. I've come in second many times. But well, I thought you'd heard that joke before, but feel free to steal it. But what I find most frustrating about legal services work as a practicing on-the-ground lawyer and manager is the number of people that we have to turn away, the amount of triage that we do, the amount of diversion that we're doing. And so as someone who's always been interested in technology as a way to address the access to justice gap, I immediately started playing with AI tools. And what I realized, and as Dean Perlman described, they are extremely effective at delivering information if you work with them properly. For example, at Legal Aid in New York City, we have a hotline, and one of the most common questions that we get is, where is the courthouse? Or what are the hours of the courthouse? Or where do I find Form X to file in my eviction case? And what happens is our staff is burning out answering these questions hundreds of times every week over and over. And they don't feel effective. They don't feel impactful. And with AI, we can build models, and we're experimenting with this in New York City, that deliver the right answer in any language instantly. And they work 24/7, 365. So I think we must adopt, experiment, implement these tools in a careful way. And in terms of resources and efficiency, I really see this pivotal moment where we can do 10x, 100x more than what we're doing now. And when we refer to that 92% number, which we've heard over and over today, we can bring that down. We can tackle more and more problems. We can make sure our staff is more effective, and we can deliver better outcomes for people.
So can you give an example of your own use of and the tool that you've developed to make your work more efficient?
Absolutely. So a common example that we face in New York City is someone gets evicted because they failed to assert a legal defense in a timely manner. And in the public housing context, this happens when a person is seeking to assert their right to take over a lease. However, if they miss the deadline to write a letter to their housing manager in their housing project to assert this claim, and time passes, it becomes too late. And so I played with ChatGPT and tried to build a model in which a tenant could generate a letter, kind of like what Dean Perlman described and demonstrated. And in a second, with the right parameters and prompts, and with feeding the model the right information, and that's another element of this, and we can get into that afterwards. You can ask me about it, and Dean Perlman can talk more about it. You can generate a letter. And had someone in this position generated a letter and sent it, they would be able to have a chance to keep their home. And that's something that legal services organizations in New York City and elsewhere lack the resources to handle. We can't do these one-off services. We can't do them quickly enough. Often people come to us and it's too late.
So Satish makes a very important point about what you feed into the artificial intelligence tool that you're using. You can use it to draw from the internet, or you can use it to draw only from a subset of information that you've supplied it with. Let me give you an example that I'm familiar with here in the District of Columbia. I live here in DC. In this city of about 710,000 people, we have about 40 legal services providers. Every one of them has their own self-help tools, their materials online available to people who need assistance. You can use generative AI to feed all of the self-help resources that these 40 legal aid organizations have generated into a unit, and then ask the generative AI tool to summarize it, to produce sort of a best of the best, pull it all together and integrate it, so that instead of having to do it 40 times, you can do it once. And if it's curated properly, if you have experts overseeing it, you can provide the best of the best to your community. And you can do it in language they can understand. I encourage all of you, if you haven't used generative AI tools, to give them a try. You will be amazed at the clarity of the communication that comes out. I'd like to next turn to Margaret, who is the world's greatest expert on bringing principles of human-centered design to law. And Margaret is a thought leader in how to manage the risks of generative AI, how to generate standards that will improve the accuracy, maximize the potential of generative AI while minimizing the risks. Margaret?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Is my mic working, or should I do handheld? I do handheld. So first, can I take a poll? I know it's that time of the afternoon. Could you raise your hand if you're optimistic about the potential for AI to close the justice gap? How about those who might be more pessimistic? Do we have any? I know that there is a healthy debate out there, and I want to acknowledge that. I want to talk through this because I think about this a lot. I have the privilege of being at a university where I get to think big, think strategically, think nationally. And our lab at Stanford Law School that has worked on improving access to justice for the past 10 years. We've worked on websites, we've worked on text messaging, we've worked on new service models. We are interested in the potential of AI, but we don't want to rush headlong into full-blown optimism. We want to really think strategically and empirically. So the first, I want to talk about 3 shifts that I think, especially those of us who have power about what legal aid services look like, what court services, what community justice worker services look like, that we should be thinking in a little bit of a shifted way about the potential for AI. The first shift I'd like you to think about is just at the big picture. Oh, I think it looks dark over here, but that's what I want. This should be white in the background. Oftentimes, when I go to conferences in the academic world, there's a big debate between optimism and pessimism. I'm a believer in realism, techno-realism, that instead of making kind of our guesses about the future of AI based on our hunches or our anecdotes, we need to be talking to people. We need to be gathering data, and we need to be responding to how people are actually behaving on the ground. So in our lab, we've been interviewing people. We've been interviewing adults across America about if and how they would use AI for legal problem solving. So we've been doing this in courthouse lobbies and by recruiting people on Facebook to be interviewed by us, and we give them a fictional legal problem. We give them a scenario that they got an eviction notice on their door, and we ask them before they use the tool, before they use AI, how valuable they think AI would be and how trustworthy it might be. That's the graph that you see on the top left. Kind of middle of the road, 3 out of 6. AI might help me, it might not. I'm not sure if I would trust it. After they try out a tool like Bard, now Gemini, or ChatGPT, you can see on the top right how they shift in terms of trust. And on the bottom 2 diagrams, you can see most people find it 6 out of 6 helpfulness. And they say, after trying AI for legal problem solving, most people say 6 out of 6, I will be using this again. When we hear quotes from people about why they find AI helpful, we can see that likely there is going to be a consumer shift from starting at Google search, which most people are starting at Google search right now when they have a life or legal problem. But we can imagine it shifting to AI in the next year or 2. Like one of the women we interviewed, African-American woman in her mid-30s, she's a HR generalist, she has some college. She loved that AI laid things out step by step, plain language, easy ways to understand, helped her get a plan to actually take action for an eviction notice. Or a young man in his 20s who works in construction, he also found the AI surprisingly helpful. This task of legal research, it was daunting before, but now AI makes me feel like I can do this. I can get started. Or a woman in her early 50s, she wasn't going to rely on AI for everything, but she said, this gives me a starting point. I can see that there's a recourse out there. I know how to get in touch with people. This is a better way than the other ways that existed before, whether that's talking to your friends and neighbors, or calling hotlines, or going to Google. So we see that there is this huge interest in the public for AI tools for problem solving. But I'm sure all of us are thinking, is it actually good? Is it hallucinating? Is it making up quotes? Is it making up case law? Is it making up fake legal aid groups? And that's why we need to think in another shift about how we plan for AI in the justice system. And this means going from a reactive stance, where we in the justice community and lawyers are kind of waiting to see what tech companies like Google and Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic, what are they going to do? What kind of models are they going to release? Instead of being reactive to what the technologists are doing, we need to be proactive. We need to be in there with these tech companies right now, helping them set the standards and make the models better for what we know are the possible harms. So we need to think about a regulatory and policy approach that's not reactive, which means waiting for harms to happen and then getting attorney generals to prosecute the companies that are violating privacy, causing harms, kind of how legal tech has been regulated in the past. Instead, we need to be setting up leaderboards. We need to be evaluating the models right now, what ChatGPT is offering, what Anthropic is offering, what Google is offering, and we need to be rating them. How good are they at answering people's landlord-tenant questions in the state of Georgia, in the state of Missouri, in the state of Pennsylvania? How many times are they getting it right and wrong? We need to be publishing those quality standards and those ratings and putting pressure on the technology companies to get accurate legal information and helpful legal information. And that means not waiting around, but measuring them and measuring them often. So my lab, in addition to interviewing regular people, we've been interviewing legal experts, folks who run law help websites, hotlines, staff legal aid clinics, and other frontline services. And we've been asking them, let's get specific about quality metrics. Let's really define how we measure if an answer to a landlord-tenant question is good or not in a very engineer-friendly rating. We're using those specific metrics to now start auditing GPT 3.5, GPT 4, Google Gemini, to see how often are they producing high quality or low quality answers. Because we believe that by constantly benchmarking and auditing these technology companies, we can put pressure on them to improve their performance. The final shift is thinking about how we develop solutions. Again, for those of us in the room, all of the executive directors, the funders, the strategists, how do we actually get AI to start closing the justice gap? And the big shift here is from thinking about local one-off pilots, like a great example in New York City, to thinking about coordinated and systematic research and development. And that means bringing cohorts together so that folks who are working on great housing answers in New York City are talking to people in Missouri, California, West Virginia, Oregon, that we are building those data sets, those tools, and that knowledge around all these different tasks that legal aid groups do, whether that's answering people's questions, providing coaching and support, helping people prepare for mediations, checking over documents. We need to have national cohorts that are working together on getting data sets, building best practices, and building tools that can start working at the national level. That's a lot of information. I'll stop there. Thank you so much. You can scan this QR code if you want to see more of the research we've been doing.
Thank you, Margaret. I have a question for you. It's a question about timing. When? I'm getting impatient with closing the justice gap. You got a room dominated by optimists here.
Yeah.
The question I like to ask these days when anybody proposes some solution to the justice gap is, in what year, in what decade, in what century will your solution close the justice gap? I think we need to ask that question. So when? What is the timetable for implementing the kind of steps that you're talking about here?
Well, in many respects, the cat's out of the bag. The big companies have published these amazing tools, ChatGPT, Gemini, for free, giving instant free access to some amount of AI for people to answer questions, try to generate documents. So it's out there. The lawyer and internal regulator in me wants to pull it back a little bit with standards, with quality benchmarking, to make sure that we are getting the least amount of hallucinations, the highest accuracy. But in some respect, the cat is out of the bag. For all of those behind-the-scenes tasks and for lawyer-driven AI innovation, we need to be starting now. And thanks to TIG support, that hopefully we'll see a lot of really great coordination and lots of new pilots coming out with the TIG funding this year. We built a great cohort applying to a TIG this year of legal help website administrators, 6 different states, coming together to propose how AI can help amplify the services they're able to give in all of their states. So we need to be working right now, and I think making sure that we, as lawyers and folks who really are prioritizing good justice outcomes, are getting involved with all of the technology companies who are putting their tools out there for the public right away.
The plan that you outlined requires a lot of collaboration across different sectors. Who's going to own that? Who's going to be the convener that brings those entities together to address the issues that you've identified?
Well, it's going to be networked. I think universities can play a great role in doing a lot of the empirical research. Can these AI tools actually live up to the standards we want to set for them? The legal aid groups and executive directors, court help centers are going to have to work with us to help really make sure we have clearly defined standards. I think groups like LSC can be a wonderful convener to bring technology companies to the table so that we can make sure that we're communicating with them about how their models are actually performing on these crucial tasks.
This rockstar panel not only just communicated a whole lot of valuable information, they did it in 30 minutes. Would you please join me in thanking them?